The hospital atrium had the kind of light that made everything look kinder than it was. Afternoon rain braided down the glass wall, a quartet tuned softly by the elevator bank. Pastel balloons bobbed over a dessert table with neat rows of macarons and a sign that read "Welcome Baby Mercer" in gold script. Eleanor paused at the threshold, smoothing the thrift store navy dress she'd ironed until the seams behaved. In her hands, a hand-tied bouquet of daisies, wrapped in paper cut from yesterday's newspaper, twine pulled tight. She spotted her daughter, Grace, 8 months along, one palm pressed to her lower back, the other guarding a small plate she didn't seem hungry for. Daniel, her husband, hovered with that clipped, careful smile he wore around his parents. "Mom," Grace breathed when she saw her. Relief moved through her face like sun. Eleanor kissed her cheek, tasting the subtle salt of worry. "You okay?" "Better, now," Eleanor said. "Sit. I'll bring you tea." Before she could turn, Lila Mercer materialized, perfume arriving a second earlier. Diamonds winked at her throat, the kind that made people stand straighter. "Eleanor," Lila sang, eyes dipping to the daisies. "How rustic." Victor Mercer followed, posture like a measuring stick. "We're so pleased you could make it," he said, the pleased balancing on a needle. Eleanor tucked the bouquet closer to herself. "Thank you for hosting here. It's convenient for Grace." "Oh, we host," Lila laughed, and with 2 fingers adjusted a name card at the head table as if the room only worked when she touched it. "Daniel's family has always supported St. Augustine's tradition." Phones lifted across the room. Guests found angles. Daniel clinked a glass but didn't speak. Victor stepped up instead, trained to take a microphone the way a fish takes water. "Friends, family," Victor announced, smile calibrated to the far corner. "What a joy to celebrate our grandchild right here in the hospital wing our family helped build." Applause. And a special welcome to Grace's mother. He pivoted, hand outstretched toward Eleanor without looking at her. "Our spirited minimalist. The cheap grandma who brought nothing." Laughter rolled like marbles on tile. A few faces stiffened, not sure the joke was safe. Eleanor felt heat climb her neck. She glanced at Grace, who sucked in a breath and dropped her gaze to the plate, the fork unmoving. Daniel's polite smile faltered, then returned as if he'd been corrected by a remote hand. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the twine until it cut a small line into her skin. She tasted the old copper of swallowed words. She could leave. Take the stairs down, out through the automatic doors, into the rain. But Grace's shoulders were hunched like a shelter too small for a storm, and leaving would mean the storm won. She lifted her chin. "I brought what I could," she said, voice even. "And I'll bring more if needed." "Sweet," Lila said, already turning to pose with a cousin. "Every little bit helps." The quartet began a light waltz. Servers glided with flutes of sparkling cider. In the corner, a slender woman in a white coat, Dr. Amina Imani, OB chief, watched without blinking, one thumb idly tracing a crease in a manila folder. When Eleanor's eyes met hers, something steadied between them, a held rope. Grace whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" Eleanor asked. "For them." Grace's smile wobbled. "For all of this." Eleanor brushed stray hair from her daughter's temple. "Breathe," she said. "You're safe." Victor raised his glass again. "To family," he declared, "and to doing things the right way." His gaze skipped over Eleanor like a stone on water. This time the laugh was smaller, uncertain. A hospital event coordinator slid behind the AV table and checked a queue list. Eleanor noticed, and her pulse slowed, not from fear, but from timing. She had come early. She had asked for a small courtesy no one in the room would understand yet. She had not expected to use it today. But the joke had decided for her. The quartet tapered, the last violin note hanging. Dr. Imani stepped forward, not to the microphone, just into the shape of the room's attention. "If I may," she said, and didn't wait for permission. A brief correction. Lila's smile sharpened. "Doctor, later, let's keep it festive." Imani's expression didn't change. Festivity and accuracy are not enemies. The event coordinator pressed a button. The far wall brightened, a projector hummed to life. On the screen, a simple hospital ledger, names blurred except one. Patient guarantor, Eleanor James. Status, paid in full. A murmur pulled through the crowd like a tide. Phones rose again, this time less eager, more defensive. Imani spoke gently, as if reading the heartbeat on a monitor. Every prenatal visit, lab, and consult associated with Grace Mercer's care has been prepaid by Ms. James. Additionally, a fund she established, quietly, has covered appointments for 3 other expectant mothers unable to pay this month. Silence took the room by the shoulders. Victor's mouth opened and closed. That's, surely, a mistake. It isn't, Imani said. We triple-checked. Lila blinked, then laughed a half-step too late. How precious, she tried. Eleanor, dear, you should have told us. We'd have reimbursed you. Eleanor looked at the daisies in her hands, the newsprint crinkled soft by her palm. It wasn't a loan, she said. It was protection. Grace's hand found Eleanor's. She squeezed hard, relief digging like anchors into sand. Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, Mom, maybe we should. Sit, Victor hissed, and the way the word arrived, flat, practiced, made Daniel smaller in an instant. Dr. Imani glanced to someone Eleanor hadn't seen slide in, a woman with a slim leather folder and the quiet eyes of an auditor. The woman nodded once, almost invisible. Eleanor exhaled, the rope in her chest loosening by an inch. The projector dimmed, but the quiet didn't. Somewhere a balloon bumped the ceiling with a soft, questioning thud. The quartet didn't resume. Rain ticked like a metronome on glass. Lila lifted her glass again, hands steady by force. Well, she said brightly, isn't that enough? Grace said, not loud, but final. She rose, one palm on her belly, the other still holding her mother's. Her face had changed, not into someone else, but into someone no longer asking permission to exist. The room held its breath. Dr. Imani stepped one pace closer to the Mercers. There's more, she said quietly. But not yet. Eleanor felt every eye tilt her way, waiting for gloating, a victory speech, the messy satisfaction of revenge delivered hot. She had none to give. Only the daisies, the rain, and the knowledge that this was the first step, not the last. Tea, she murmured to Grace, because small mercies were also plans. Let's get you tea. They moved together through the parted crowd, silence following like a camera, toward the refreshment table where the steam curled up, warm as breath, and where the next reveal waited, already in motion. The projector light faded, but the weight it left behind remained, pressing down on every guest like a second gravity. The hospital atrium, once humming with chatter and the delicate trill of violins, had gone still. Rain streaked the tall windows, and the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Eleanor didn't speak. She stood beside her daughter, fingers still laced with Grace's, the daisies trembling slightly in her other hand. She didn't need to say anything, the numbers on the screen had already done it for her. Dr. Amina Imani, steady in her white coat, stepped closer to the crowd. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. Every ear strained toward her. Let us be clear, she said evenly. Mrs. James covered not only Grace Mercer's care, but also prepaid for contingencies. Emergencies. Extra consultations. She wanted to ensure her daughter and grandchild never faced delay or denial. A ripple passed through the guests. Whispers carried like paper tearing. Someone lowered their phone slowly, realizing this wasn't a joke to share on Instagram but a story that might end up in court. Victor's face darkened, his jaw set so tight the muscles jumped. Doctor, he said, tone still sharp enough to cut, this is a private family gathering. Whatever administrative detail you think you're clarifying can be handled in an office. Not here. Imani didn't flinch. It isn't an administrative detail, Mr. Mercer. It's the truth. And it deserved to be corrected in the same room where the insult was made. gasps whispered across the atrium. Lila's painted smile faltered, the diamond at her throat catching too much light. She leaned toward Eleanor, lowering her voice to a hiss meant for her alone. "You did this to embarrass us, didn't you?" Eleanor looked her in the eye. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "I did this to protect my daughter. The rest, you chose yourselves." Grace's hand tightened in her mother's, tears brimming. Her body trembled, shame mixing with relief, as if all the weight she'd been carrying in silence had suddenly shifted onto those who had mocked her. Daniel cleared his throat, voice cracking slightly. "Mom, Dad, maybe you should apologize." His words were tentative, but they cracked through the hush like a glass breaking. Victor turned sharply to his son. "Apologize? For what? We've built wings of this hospital. Paid for scholarships. Our name is on the plaque downstairs. And this," he jabbed a finger toward the projector, toward Eleanor, "this is a stunt. A performance." But even as he spoke, eyes in the room shifted. Guests avoided his gaze, leaning instead toward Eleanor, who stood steady with nothing flashy, nothing to hide. The daisies looked more dignified than the jewels glittering on Lila's neck. Dr. Imani closed the folder she carried, the soft click of the clasp loud in the silence. "There's more to discuss," she said carefully, "but not in this room. Not yet." She glanced at Eleanor, a silent promise passing between them. Eleanor nodded, the smallest movement. She hadn't asked for this theater, hadn't craved an audience. Yet, now that it was here, she understood, humiliation could be a weapon, but so could truth. Lila tried to recover. She lifted her glass, forcing cheer back into her tone. "Well, isn't that touching? Eleanor's little gift. Every family has its quirks, doesn't it?" She laughed too brightly, like glass chimes hit by a storm. No one laughed with her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was condemning. Grace finally spoke, her voice low but sharp enough to pierce the air. "It's not a quirk. It's my mother. And she's done more for me and this baby than anyone else in this room." The atrium tilted. For the first time, Daniel's gaze faltered from his parents, lingering instead on his wife. The line had shifted, though no one had moved an inch. Eleanor inhaled slowly, her heartbeat steady despite the storm. The correction had changed the room. The humiliation had swung back, quiet and heavy, onto the shoulders of those who had thrown it. And though the guests didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. Somewhere in the corner, the compliance officer with the slim leather folder made a discreet note, "Eyes on Victor." Eleanor caught it, a detail small enough to be missed, but not by her. The daisies crinkled in her hand as she thought, they laughed too soon. They don't realize what's already been. The baby shower resumed, but not really. The violins started again, yet their melody felt hollow, as if even the music didn't believe in it anymore. Guests lifted cider flutes to their lips, but their eyes stayed glued to the family at the center of the storm. The room was no longer about balloons and pastel cupcakes, it had become a theater of suspicion. Eleanor stood beside Grace, still holding the daisies, her posture calm but unyielding. She wasn't a woman who liked attention, yet she carried it now like a quiet crown. Grace's hand never left hers, as though the touch was the only thing keeping her steady. Daniel, pale and restless, shifted from foot to foot, glancing at his parents, then at Eleanor, as if torn between two worlds. And then the detail most guests had missed became obvious. The woman with the slim leather folder was not part of the catering staff or hospital PR. She had the careful eyes of someone trained to notice too much. She stepped forward just enough for her badge to catch the light, "Hospital compliance officer." "Mr. Mercer," she said evenly, "I'll need to schedule a time with your office this week. There are irregularities regarding billing for several obstetric consults connected to Mercer Wellness Group." The words fell like a gavel. Conversations that had been murmurs died instantly. All eyes turned to Victor. Victor froze, then laughed a single, dismissive note. "Irregularities? We donate millions every year. If there's a clerical error, my accountants will address it." His voice carried the casual arrogance of a man who had never been cornered. But the officer was unmoved. She tapped the folder. It's not a clerical error. Identical charges. Duplicate consults. Same codes appearing across multiple patient bills. Patterns like this aren't accidents. Lila stepped in quickly, wrapping her arm around Victor's. This is outrageous. At a baby shower? You can't just barge in and accuse. But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying fear beneath the anger. Daniel's face changed at that moment. The faint suspicion he had been swallowing all night finally surfaced. He turned toward his father. Dad, what is she talking about? His voice wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than a shout. Victor glared at his son, his authority slicing sharper than words. Stay out of this, Daniel. But Daniel didn't back down this time. His gaze lingered on Eleanor, then returned to the compliance officer. The dots were connecting in his mind, slowly but relentlessly. Eleanor said nothing. She let the silence do its work. Yet inside, her chest tightened. This was the first glimpse of what she had suspected weeks ago when she combed through Grace's medical bills late at night with a calculator and a pot of tea. The guests whispered again, but their tone had shifted. This wasn't curiosity anymore, it was unease. Dr. Imani spoke then, her voice steady. This hospital takes billing integrity seriously. These questions will not disappear, no matter how loud the laughter or how many plaques hang downstairs. Victor's smile cracked for the first time. We'll discuss this privately, he snapped. Privately? Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm, measured. You mock me publicly. The room stiffened. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, steady as stone. Victor turned red, his composure fraying. You don't understand the scale of what we do, Eleanor. This, he waved dismissively at the folder, this is paperwork. You should stay in your lane. Grace, trembling, looked between them. Her lane, she whispered. She's the reason I even have safe care. Her voice rose despite the tears in her eyes. She's done more than all your speeches and donations combined. The air quivered with the tension, the kind that precedes storms. The compliance officer closed her folder with a crisp snap. We'll be in touch, she said, her tone final, before stepping back into the periphery. The guests pretended to sip drinks, but the atmosphere was charged. Everyone had seen it, the red flags raised, the cracks spreading across the Mercer's perfect facade. Eleanor stood quietly, not victorious, not smug. Just steady. She wasn't fighting for recognition, she was holding a mirror up to those who had laughed at her. And for the first time in years, Victor Mercer didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man cornered. The daisies in Eleanor's hand rustled as she exhaled, thinking, they wanted to humiliate me. But they don't realize, their own secrets will humiliate them far more. You. The rain outside thickened, streaking the atrium windows with silver. The baby shower decorations, balloons, ribbons, pastel banners, suddenly looked absurd against the tension that had taken root in the room. The laughter was gone. The chatter gone. What remained was silence, heavy and charged, circling Eleanor, Grace, and the Mercers like wolves around firelight. Victor shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his cufflinks as if they were shackles. Lila pressed her lips into a smile that no longer convinced anyone, her knuckles white around her untouched cider glass. Guests glanced at one another with wide eyes, sensing that they were witnessing a turning point but not knowing what it would cost. Dr. Imani stepped forward again, her presence unhurried but commanding. She carried another folder now, this one thicker, sealed with a red ribbon. There is something else, she said, her voice cutting through the still air. And it cannot wait. Victor raised a hand sharply. Enough. This is our event, and I won't have it hijacked with hospital politics. Imani ignored him. She turned toward Grace, her tone softening. Grace, dear, do you remember the paperwork you signed when your mother came with you last month? The extra guarantor forms? Grace blinked, uncertain. She glanced at Eleanor. I thought, Those were just standard check-ins. Eleanor's hand squeezed hers gently. Not quite. Imani opened the folder, sliding out a document and laying it on the nearest table. Guests leaned in instinctively, the rustle of fabric loud in the quiet. This, she explained, is a guarantor agreement. It means that because Mrs. James paid your medical expenses in full, she was entitled to designate certain conditions. Specifically, if any harassment or undue pressure from family interfered with your care, all medical decisions and communications would automatically be transferred to you alone. No intermediaries. No parental overrides. Effective immediately. A murmur ran through the room like a shiver. Grace's mouth fell open. So, if they try to interfere? They can't, Imani confirmed. Not legally. Not medically. The line was signed in ink weeks ago. Lila's glass slipped from her fingers, cider splashing across the polished floor. You can't, this is outrageous. Daniel is our son. We are the grandparents. We have rights. No, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but unshakable. You had influence. Not rights. Not anymore. Victor's composure cracked, his voice rising, desperate. This is manipulation. You tricked her, he pointed at Eleanor, his finger trembling with fury. You've always wanted to embarrass us, to poison Grace against her husband's family. Eleanor didn't flinch. I wanted my daughter safe, she replied. Every signature, every clause, every receipt, I did it for that. If you feel humiliated, that's because truth has a way of undoing lies. Daniel, who had been frozen in silence, finally spoke. His voice wavered but carried weight. Dad. Mom, maybe you don't see it. But this isn't about you anymore. It's about Grace. About the baby. He turned to Grace, his face crumbling with shame. I should have defended you sooner. I let them treat your mom like she was nothing. Grace's eyes glistened. She wanted to believe him, but the wound was deep. Around them, the guests shifted. Aunts, cousins, colleagues, all of them saw the balance of power shifting, the Mercer's grandeur wilting under the weight of paperwork and principle. Dr. Imani gathered the documents, her tone final. The hospital will honor the guarantor agreement without exception. From this moment forward, all decisions belong to Grace. Eleanor exhaled, the daisies trembling in her hand. She hadn't smiled all night, but now, just for a heartbeat, the corners of her mouth softened. The line had been drawn, not in laughter, not in speeches, but in ink. And everyone in that atrium knew, the Mercers had just lost something they thought untouchable, control. Victor's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced a thin smile, but his eyes betrayed him. This wasn't over. And Eleanor, steady as ever, knew it too. They'll come for me in private, she thought. And that's exactly where I want them. You said. The baby shower limped forward, but its spirit had bled out. Guests picked at cupcakes without appetite, their conversations hushed and fragmented. The quartet played again, but the music was off-key, too careful, like even the bows feared striking the wrong chord. Eleanor stayed close to Grace, guiding her to a chair near the window. The rain outside had slowed, but drops still clung to the glass like beads of sweat. Grace sat with one hand on her belly, her breaths uneven, the chaos of the last hour weighing on her shoulders. Daniel hovered, guilty and torn, while his parents lingered at the far side of the atrium, their polished facades cracking. Lila watched Eleanor with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Finally, when the attention of the crowd shifted back toward the dessert table, she slipped through the guests, her heels clicking like a metronome. She brushed past Eleanor with a rehearsed smile and murmured low, "We need to talk." Alone. Eleanor studied her for a moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. They stepped into a side corridor, away from the music and chatter. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic, the overhead lights buzzing with a sterile hum. Lila's diamond necklace glittered even here, like a weapon disguised as beauty. Her tone shifted immediately, stripped of charm. Listen, she hissed, checking over her shoulder. We can clean this up. You've embarrassed us enough. But it doesn't have to go further. Eleanor tilted her head. Go further? Lila reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a small envelope, pressing it against Eleanor's chest. Take this. Consider it compensation. We'll spin a statement, say you made a heartfelt gesture, we exaggerated, everyone goes home happy. You walk away with a little something for your troubles. Eleanor didn't move. Her fingers stayed on the daisies, her eyes steady on Lila's. You think this is about money? It's always about money, Lila snapped. Don't pretend you're different. You work at that, what is it, alteration shop, don't you? Struggling to scrape by. This will make life easier. For you. For Grace. Nobody has to know what you really did. We'll bury it. The envelope crinkled between them. Eleanor's heartbeat slowed, each thud steady, deliberate. She lifted her phone from her pocket with her free hand, angling it just enough. A faint red light blinked. You should choose your words carefully, Eleanor said softly. Lila froze, realization dawning. You're recording this? Of course, Eleanor replied. You wanted private. Private is where people show their real faces. Lila's composure cracked, her voice rising. You manipulative, this will ruin Daniel. Do you even care what happens to your daughter's marriage? Eleanor leaned closer, her voice low, deliberate. I care about Grace having a husband who stands with her, not behind you. If he can't, then maybe he isn't the man she thinks he is. For a moment, Lila's mask slipped completely. Her fury blazed naked in her eyes. She stuffed the envelope back into her purse with trembling hands. You'll regret this, she spat. You're playing a game you can't win. Eleanor didn't answer. She simply slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked past her, the daisies still clutched in her hand. Back in the atrium, Grace looked up immediately, her eyes searching her mother's face. Eleanor smiled faintly, reassuring, though the storm in her chest still rumbled. Victor was watching from across the room, suspicion carved into his features. He hadn't heard the words, but he saw the shift. He knew something had been exchanged, something invisible, but dangerous. Eleanor sat beside her daughter again, her voice soft. Drink some water, darling. Keep calm. Grace obeyed, though her hand trembled. What did she want? She whispered. Nothing worth taking, Eleanor said. But inside, she knew she now held something more powerful than money, evidence. Proof of what the Mercers really were when the world wasn't looking. And she would keep it safe until the right moment to use it. For Eleanor, revenge wasn't rage. It was patience. And tonight had just given her the piece she needed to finish the puzzle. You said. The storm Eleanor had felt building in the atrium broke before midnight, only not in the way anyone expected. By evening, the guests had gone home whispering, carrying with them the fragments of what they had witnessed, the insult, the doctor's correction, the legal clause, the humiliation that clung to the Mercers like a second skin. Most planned to keep their mouths shut. But one didn't. A cousin of Daniel's, a teenager with more curiosity than tact, had recorded the entire moment when Victor called Eleanor the cheap grandma who brought nothing. The clip was less than 30 seconds long, shaky and grainy, but the sound was clear, Victor's smug laughter, Lila's chiming giggle, and then Dr. Imani's calm voice cutting through, correction, Mrs. James paid for all of her daughter's care. By morning, it was everywhere. The video spread across local feeds before dawn, captioned, "When the truth shuts the room down." Within hours, it had been shared on parenting forums, hospital review sites, and even the local news page. Hashtags bloomed, hashtag cheap grandma, hashtag correction day, hashtag truth at the shower. Eleanor sat in her small kitchen, phone buzzing on the table beside her. She hadn't posted anything herself, but friends from the alteration shop kept sending links. That's you, isn't it? One text read. Another, Eleanor, you're famous. She ignored most of them, sipping tea from a chipped mug. Fame was never her goal. Safety was. But she understood quickly that this was no longer something that could be contained. Grace called, her voice shaky. "Mom, it's everywhere. My coworkers saw it before I even walked into the office. They said I should be proud of you." A pause, then softer, "But Daniel's parents are furious." Eleanor smiled grimly. "Of course they are." And furious was an understatement. At the Mercer estate, Victor slammed the morning paper onto the dining table. The headline read, "Mercer Philanthropy questioned after baby shower video." His face turned crimson as he barked into the phone with his PR manager. "Shut it down. I don't care how. Call the platforms, threaten lawsuits. This video dies today." But when his manager spoke back, her voice was hesitant. "It's too late, Mr. Mercer. The video's been copied hundreds of times. Every time one post is removed, 3 more appear. People, they like the story. They like Eleanor." Victor's fist clenched so tightly the veins stood out. "We'll bury her with our own version." Lila tried to soothe him, though her own hands trembled. "We'll release a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding, that we were joking." But the truth was already louder than any statement they could craft. The internet had chosen its villain, and its hero. At the hospital, Dr. Imani's office phone rang without pause. Patients wanted to donate to the mother's fund. A journalist requested comment about billing irregularities. The compliance officer from the party filed her first report, noting potential systemic fraud linked to Mercer Wellness Group consults. Daniel, caught between his wife and his parents, scrolled the video over and over again in silence. He watched his father smirk. He heard the laughter. He saw his mother, standing small but unbroken, holding daisies while the room mocked her. Then he heard the truth land like a thunderclap. And for the first time, he didn't know if he was proud or ashamed. Meanwhile, Eleanor folded laundry in her apartment, her phone buzzing endlessly, her tea growing cold. She knew what this meant. The Mercers would not let the humiliation stand. They would come harder, strike deeper, try to claw back the narrative. But she had something they didn't, patience, and the recording of Lila's whispered bribe tucked safely away. As the video reached 10,000 shares by nightfall, Eleanor whispered to herself, "They wanted to make me invisible. Now the whole world sees them instead." And she knew, the game had changed. The Mercers no longer controlled the story. The story controlled them. By the next weekend, the Mercer estate felt less like a home and more like a fortress under siege. Reporters lingered at the gates, microphones ready, while drones buzzed overhead, trying to capture a glimpse of the disgraced philanthropists. Victor spent his days pacing the study, barking into the phone. "We've given millions. They can't erase that with one silly video." His voice cracked with something he refused to call desperation. Lila sat stiff on the velvet sofa, scrolling endlessly through comments that cut sharper than knives. "Cheap grandma has more dignity than those frauds. Mercers care more about plaques than people." She tried to laugh them off, but her eyes watered despite her mascara. Daniel and Grace had stayed silent through the chaos, but silence is never neutral. That Sunday, at a family dinner meant to restore order, the silence finally broke. The dining hall gleamed as always, polished oak table, silver cutlery, a chandelier dripping light like crystal rain. Yet the air was heavy, brittle, as though one wrong word could shatter it. Victor carved into his steak with a violent precision. "Grace, you need to delete your social accounts. Every trace. This circus ends tonight." Grace laid her fork down carefully. Her voice shook but didn't break. "I didn't post anything, Victor. I didn't leak that video. Someone else did." "That doesn't matter," he snapped. "You're benefiting from it. Your mother is basking in it. And now our name is in the gutter because you let her embarrass us." Grace's breath caught. She stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. "Because I let her? She saved me. She saved this baby. And you," her voice cracked, "you mocked her for it." The words echoed. Even the chandelier seemed to hum with them. Daniel set his knife down slowly. His palms were damp, his throat tight. He had watched the video 100 times since that day, replayed his father's smirk, his mother's laughter, his wife's tears. And now, faced with the raw wound of Grace's voice, something inside him split. He turned toward his parents. "You went too far." Lila gasped, her fork clattering against china. "Daniel, don't you dare." But he pressed on, voice steady for the first time in years. "You humiliated Grace. You humiliated Eleanor. And now, instead of apologizing, you're trying to erase it, as if truth can be deleted like a post." Victor's face reddened. "We built everything you stand on, boy. Don't forget who you are." "No," Daniel said quietly. "You built a facade. I'm deciding who I am." The table erupted in overlapping voices, Lila pleading, Victor shouting, Grace holding her belly and whispering Daniel's name like an anchor. But beneath it all, the truth rang clear: the family had split. Later that night, back in their apartment, Grace wept into Daniel's shoulder. "I thought you'd never see it," she whispered. Daniel's arms tightened around her. "I saw. I just didn't want to admit it." He kissed her forehead, guilt heavy in his chest. "I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I didn't protect your mom." In another corner of the city, Eleanor sat at her sewing table, the daisies now dried and pressed in a book beside her. She stitched quietly, each thread pulling her thoughts tighter. She knew Victor and Lila wouldn't stop. Families like theirs never surrendered. But she also knew this: Daniel had crossed the invisible line. He had chosen Grace. And when lines are crossed, there is no going back. The Mercers had lost more than control that night. They had lost their son. And Eleanor, steady in her silence, thought, this is only the beginning of their undoing. The hospital boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. A long oval table stretched under the glow of recessed lights, its surface already littered with folders, laptops, and half-drunk cups. The compliance officer, Ms. Hartwell, stood at the front, a projector humming softly behind her. Eleanor sat quietly at the far end of the table, hands folded, daisies pressed between the pages of a notebook. She hadn't asked to be here, but Dr. Imani insisted. "You're the one who noticed first," she'd said. "You deserve to see the rest." On the screen, line after line of invoices appeared. Names blurred for privacy, but the pattern was unmistakable, identical charges repeating across different patients. The same inflated consult fee, the same clinic name, Mercer Wellness Group. Hartwell's voice was calm, professional, but every word struck like a hammer. Over 200 duplicate consults in the last 6 months. No patient records matched the billed services. Payments routed through shell subsidiaries, all leading back to Mercer-controlled entities. A low murmur rippled through the board members. One leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Are you saying this is deliberate?" Hartwell clicked to the next slide, an internal email chain. The projector filled with black text, red boxes highlighting the damning phrases. "Maintain current billing codes for all obstetric patients regardless of visit details. Priority to keep donor visibility aligned with hospital expansions. Review invoices before external audit, Victor Mercer to approve." The silence in the room thickened. The words needed no interpretation. Victor, sitting near the front, stiffened. He tried to laugh, though the sound was brittle. "These are standard communications. Every business uses templates, drafts, it doesn't mean fraud." But Hartwell wasn't finished. She tapped her laptop, and a live video feed opened on the projector. A hospital manager appeared on screen, speaking from another office. His voice was calm, almost resigned. "I followed the memo," the manager said. "It came from Mercer's office directly. We were told to push through the charges for consistency, even if patients hadn't received those services." A gasp escaped from someone at the table. Victor's face drained of color. "Lies," he barked, rising to his feet. Baseless lies from a disgruntled employee. None of this would stand in court. But Daniel, seated beside Grace, didn't move. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. He had read those emails too. He had heard the manager's voice. And now the truth pressed against him with undeniable force. "Dad," Daniel whispered, breaking the silence. His voice was cracked but steady. "Tell me it's not true." Victor's gaze flicked toward his son, then away, the hesitation louder than denial. His mouth opened, but no words came. Grace leaned into Daniel, whispering just loud enough for Eleanor to hear, "He can't." The room shifted. Board members scribbled notes, one whispered into his phone. The projector light flickered, illuminating faces frozen in disbelief. The Mercer's empire of control, once gleaming and untouchable, was unraveling under the cold light of proof. Eleanor remained silent, her gaze steady on the daisies pressed inside her notebook. She hadn't come here to watch Victor fall, only to protect Grace. But as she saw the cracks widening in the Mercer's facade, she realized something deeper. Their arrogance had been their weapon for years. Now it was their noose. Hartwell closed her laptop, the projector screen going dark. "Further investigation is ongoing," she said firmly. "For now, these findings are enough to proceed with formal action." The boardroom emptied in uneasy silence, but the line had already been crossed. Outside, Eleanor walked slowly beside her daughter. Grace's hand gripped her arm, steadying herself against the weight of 8 months of pregnancy and 8 days of chaos. Daniel trailed behind, his steps heavy. He had defended Grace once, but tonight he had witnessed proof his father could not erase. And Eleanor thought, as she pushed the glass doors open into the night air, truth doesn't whisper. It projects. And once it's lit, it can't be turned off. The storm that had been brewing finally broke in the most fragile place imaginable. The hospital atrium still held the echo of the board meeting, but for Eleanor and Grace, the night was only just beginning. As they stepped into the corridor, Grace winced, her hand clamping down on her belly. "Mom," her voice was a whisper, strained and sharp. "Something's wrong." Eleanor's heart lurched. "Breathe, darling. Tell me what you feel." Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Grace bent forward, clutching the railing. Daniel rushed to her side, panic written across his face. "She's too early, 8 months, this isn't right." Nurses appeared as if summoned by the sound of fear. Within moments, Grace was on a gurney, wheels squealing down the corridor. Eleanor moved beside her, never letting go of her hand, while Daniel trailed, pale and trembling. Inside the delivery ward, chaos pressed at the edges. Machines beeped, nurses clipped sensors to Grace's arm, and a doctor called out vitals. The fluorescent lights felt merciless, exposing every wrinkle of worry on Eleanor's face. Then the doors banged open. Lila swept in, Victor close behind. Even in panic, they carried themselves like generals marching into a war room. "She needs an epidural," Lila demanded. "Get her one now. Don't waste time on these delays." The doctor hesitated, glancing toward Grace. "We need the patient's decision, not." "She's our daughter-in-law." Victor barked. "Do as we say." "Her judgment isn't clear in pain." Grace cried out as another contraction racked her body. Eleanor squeezed her hand, whispering, "Look at me. You choose. No one else." Victor stepped closer, fury in his eyes. "This isn't your call, Eleanor. You've meddled enough." But Dr. Imani entered just then, her calm presence cutting through the noise like a blade through fog. She held up the guarantor agreement, the red ribbon still affixed. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of finality. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," she said, "you have no authority here. Effective from the moment harassment occurred at the shower, all decisions belong to Grace. That is the rule. Signed, sealed, and binding." The room froze. Nurses glanced at each other, relief softening their tense shoulders. Victor's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lila's eyes flashed with rage, her voice shrill. "This is outrageous. She's in no state to decide." Grace, panting through another wave of pain, turned her face toward them. Sweat glistened on her forehead, but her eyes were clear. "I decide," she said, her voice trembling but strong. Not you. Not anymore. Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair, whispering encouragement. That's it, love. You're stronger than they'll ever know. Daniel, shaken to his core, finally found his voice. He stood between his parents and the bed, his back straight for the first time in their presence. Leave, he said. If you can't respect Grace, then leave. Lila gasped. Daniel. Go, he repeated, louder this time, his voice cracking but firm. The guards outside, summoned discreetly by hospital staff, stepped closer. Victor and Lila had no choice. They left, their pride dragging behind them like a torn banner. Inside, the room shifted. Grace's cries became the rhythm of urgency, the nurses working with focus, Eleanor whispering steady words through every contraction. Daniel stayed by Grace's side, finally where he belonged. He wiped her brow, his eyes wet with shame and love. I should have defended you sooner, he murmured. But I'm here now. I'm not leaving again. Eleanor looked at her son-in-law, her expression unreadable. Trust was not given easily, not after so much betrayal. But for Grace's sake, she allowed a thread of hope to weave itself in. As monitors beeped steadily and the doctor gave instructions, Eleanor thought of the daisies, pressed now between pages at home. Fragile, yes, but even fragile things could outlast storms when rooted in the right soil. The rule had been written in ink, but tonight it was written in flesh and blood. Grace was no longer a pawn in the Mercer Empire. She was her own voice, her own strength. And Eleanor vowed, silently, fiercely, they will never take that away again. The delivery room blazed with fluorescent light, every surface gleaming white and cold, as if the universe itself had stripped away all pretense and left only truth. Grace lay on the bed, sweat plastering strands of hair to her face. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, timed to the contractions that shook her body like waves against rock. Push with the next one, the doctor urged, voice firm but calm. You're almost there. Eleanor stood on her daughter's left side, one hand clasping Grace's, the other stroking damp hair from her forehead. Her voice was steady, a lullaby of encouragement. You can do this, darling. You're stronger than you know. On the other side, Daniel held Grace's hand too, his face pale but fierce with determination. For the first time since the chaos began, he seemed untethered from his parents' shadow, fully present with his wife. I'm here, Grace, he whispered. I'm here. Outside the door, hospital security ensured no Mercer intrusion could break the fragile focus within. The next contraction ripped through Grace. She screamed, muscles taut, nails digging into Eleanor's hand. I can't, she sobbed. Yes, you can, Eleanor whispered, leaning close so only her daughter could hear. You already have. Every step. Every breath. This is just the last hill. And then, as if the universe listened, the cry came. Sharp. Piercing. Alive. A baby's cry. The doctor lifted the small, wriggling form, announcing with a quiet smile, a healthy baby girl. Grace collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief, laughter and tears tangled together. Daniel wept openly, his shoulders shaking, his hand trembling as he touched his daughter for the first time. She's perfect, he whispered, voice breaking. She's ours. Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. The baby was placed gently onto Grace's chest, skin against skin, her tiny fists curling instinctively. Grace's exhausted face glowed with something stronger than pride, something that belonged only to mothers who had fought for their children. The moment was fragile, holy. And yet outside, the storm was still brewing. As the baby was cleaned and swaddled, Dr. Imani entered quietly, her expression solemn. She approached Eleanor, lowering her voice so only she could hear. Preliminary audit results came in tonight. Eleanor stiffened, her eyes never leaving Grace and the baby. And? Your suspicions were correct, Imani said. Systemic overbilling, deliberate. Mercer Wellness Group has been profiting off families for years. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Eleanor exhaled slowly. She wasn't surprised, but the confirmation settled into her bones like ice. What happens now? The hospital board will move forward, Imani said. There will be hearings, investigations, maybe indictments. But tonight, her gaze softened, tonight belongs to your daughter. Eleanor nodded, her lips trembling into the faintest of smiles. She returned to Grace's side, watching her cradle the baby. Grace whispered, rocking gently, she's so small. She doesn't know the war she was born into. Eleanor brushed a fingertip across the baby's cheek, her voice steady but quiet. She doesn't need to. You fought it for her. Daniel looked up, tears still running freely. We'll name her Daisy. After the flowers you brought. Grace's tired smile widened. Daisy, she repeated, pressing her lips to the baby's forehead. The name seemed to echo, filling the sterile room with warmth. A reminder of something simple and unbreakable, something no money or arrogance could tarnish. Eleanor let herself breathe for the first time in days. For this moment, at least, the Mercers' voices were silenced. Their power stripped away, their cruelty locked outside the door. Born under harsh lights, in the middle of chaos and lies, Daisy had come into the world untouched by it all, wrapped in the truth of her mother's strength, her father's redemption, and her grandmother's unwavering love. And Eleanor knew, the fight was not over. But with Daisy's cry still echoing in her ears, she was ready for whatever came next. The days after Daisy's birth should have been a time of peace, of warm blankets and soft lullabies. But for Eleanor, peace was a luxury she knew the Mercers would never allow. Power doesn't surrender quietly, it claws until its nails break. On the third day, as Grace rested in her hospital room and Daniel dozed with the baby on his chest, Eleanor stepped into the hallway for air. The night was quiet, the corridor lined with muted lamps, the faint hum of machines echoing. She thought she might have a rare moment of calm. Instead, Victor and Lila were waiting. Lila's smile was brittle, her voice honeyed with poison. Congratulations, Eleanor. She's beautiful. Truly. You must be proud. Eleanor didn't answer. She could feel the trap woven into the sweetness. Victor stepped forward, his voice lower, businesslike. We can make this easier for everyone. Name your price. A stipend, a house, even a trust fund for the baby. Walk away from this spectacle, and we'll let you enjoy your little victory quietly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. And what do you want in return? Victor's jaw tightened. You stop pressing this hospital nonsense. No more whispers about billing. No more compliance officers sniffing around. You drop it, and we all walk away with dignity. She studied them for a long moment, then slowly pulled her phone from her pocket. With one tap, the hallway filled with the tinny playback of a recording. Lila's voice, sharp with panic, take this. Consider it compensation. Nobody has to know what you really did. We'll bury it. Lila's face went white. You? Eleanor lifted her chin. I warned you in that corridor. I don't take bribes. I keep receipts. She tucked the phone away and drew another folder from her bag, sleek, official, stamped with the hospital seal. She opened it on a side table, the pages crisp under the fluorescent glow. This, she said calmly, is a complaint already filed with the state health department. Copies of the invoices. The emails. The memo with your name, Victor. And your wife's attempt to silence me. She slid a pen across the page. But here's the choice, you can sign this agreement tonight, repay the hospital for every fraudulent charge, resign from your board positions, and issue a written apology to the Mother's Fund, or I let the complaint run its course. And trust me, it will run faster than you can buy lawyers. Victor's face hardened, fury warring with fear. Lila whispered, don't give her the satisfaction. But Eleanor's eyes burned steady. This isn't about satisfaction. It's about consequence. You laughed at me for bringing nothing. Tonight, you bring the truth. In ink. The silence stretched. Finally, Victor's shoulders slumped, the fight draining like air from a punctured balloon. With a hand that shook despite his efforts, he picked up the pen. his signature scratched across the page. Lila's breath hitched, tears of rage pooling in her eyes. She looked at Eleanor as though she'd been stripped bare. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Eleanor gathered the signed document, sliding it neatly back into the folder. "No," she said softly. "You will." She walked back into the hospital room where Daisy slept soundly in Grace's arms. Daniel stirred, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but warm with gratitude. "Everything all right?" he asked. Eleanor sat down, smoothing the blanket over her granddaughter. "Better than all right," she whispered. "It's done." But in her heart, she knew the story wasn't finished yet. Revenge wasn't just about winning, it was about leaving a mark deep enough that those who mocked her would never forget. And the final mark was still to come. The week after Daisy's birth, the Mercers' empire began to crumble, not with an explosion, but with a slow, undeniable collapse. The news spread quickly. Victor Mercer had resigned from the hospital board. The official statement framed it as a personal decision, but behind closed doors, everyone knew the truth. Their name, once polished and untouchable, now carried the sour smell of scandal. The investigation into Mercer Wellness Group had moved forward, and whispers of criminal charges swirled like smoke that couldn't be contained. At the hospital, something else bloomed. A modest plaque appeared in the corridor leading to the maternity ward. It wasn't golden or ostentatious. Just simple bronze, etched with words that made Eleanor's throat tighten when she read them. For the unknown grandmothers who paid quietly, so someone could breathe. No names. No crests. Just dignity. Eleanor stood before it one morning, the daisies she'd brought now dry and delicate in her hand. Grace joined her, Daisy nestled against her shoulder, tiny breaths warming her collarbone. Daniel lingered nearby, quieter these days, as though the weight of what his parents had built, and destroyed, was still settling on him. Grace traced the plaque with her fingertips. "They mocked you for bringing nothing," she whispered. "But you gave me everything." Eleanor smiled faintly, brushing her granddaughter's cheek with a trembling hand. "I gave you what I had. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything." Behind them, visitors paused to read the plaque, some bowing their heads, some smiling softly. Word of Eleanor's quiet fun had spread, and donations had begun to flow in, not from the wealthy chasing recognition, but from mothers, daughters, families who knew what it meant to scrape together enough so a child could be safe. The mother's fun was no longer a secret. It had become a movement. Across the city, the Mercers sulked in their mansion, curtains drawn, phone lines buzzing with lawyers and PR agents. They still had their wealth, their estate, but their power, the respect they had once demanded, was gone. They were shadows of themselves, haunting the very halls they used to dominate. Eleanor didn't think of them often anymore. Revenge wasn't about destroying their lives outright, it was about stripping away their masks so the world could see them clearly. That had already happened. And the beauty of truth was that it didn't fade, not even when those who fought it tried to hide. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the city in amber light, Eleanor sat in her small apartment with Grace and Daniel. Daisy lay sleeping in the crib Eleanor had refurbished with her own hands, the wood polished until it gleamed. The room was warm, filled with the quiet hum of family. Daniel cleared his throat, voice low. "I don't know how to thank you. For Grace. For Daisy. For opening my eyes." Eleanor regarded him for a long moment. Trust was fragile, but his words carried weight. "Thank me by being the husband and father they need," she said. "Not the son your parents tried to raise." He nodded, eyes shining with something like resolve. Eleanor leaned back, listening to Daisy's soft breaths. For the first time in years, her chest loosened, her heart quieting. She had fought humiliation, betrayal, arrogance, and lies. And she hadn't just won, she had left behind something stronger than revenge. A door was now open. For Grace. For Daisy. For every mother who had been told she brought nothing. Eleanor smiled as she whispered to the sleeping child, "You'll grow up in a world where truth speaks louder than wealth. That's my gift to you, little Daisy." And as the night wrapped around them, She knew the story was no longer about her pain, it was about the life she had helped protect, and the legacy that would outlast even the sharpest of insults. Revenge had begun with humiliation. It ended with freedom. And that was the sweetest justice of all.